I could practically recite Robert's speech from memory. I stood in our kitchen, placing the final garnish on the appetizer tray, listening to my husband of 8 years hold court in our living room. "Anna's happy keeping the house running while I handle the real business," Robert chuckled, the unmistakable clink of his bourbon glass punctuating his words. "She's got her little garden club and charity committees. Keeps her busy while I build." The Mitchell Empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The laughter that followed felt like tiny daggers. James Wilson, Robert's business partner, and Victor Chambers, their main competitor who'd recently become a reluctant ally on a major development project, were both visibly amused by my husband's dismissive characterization. "At least she's supportive," James replied. "Caroline keeps talking about getting her interior design certificate. I keep telling her, we don't need the headache of another business in the family." I set down the serving tray, my hands perfectly steady despite the quiet rage building. Inside me, this wasn't hurt. I'd moved beyond that emotion years ago. This was a cold, clarifying anger I'd been suppressing for too long. 5 years I'd spent carefully building Horizon Investments, my private equity firm that specialized in sustainable development projects across the Pacific Northwest. 5 years of early mornings analyzing market trends, late nights reviewing proposals and strategic investments that yielded consistent returns. 5 years of watching Robert swagger around Portland's business community as though he were solely responsible for the Mitchell family's growing prominence. "How does Anna feel about the Seattle project?" Victor asked, clearly trying to establish where he fit in Robert's inner circle. "It's going to mean a lot of travel for you." "She understands that's what it takes," Robert replied with the practiced patience of someone explaining something obvious. "Besides, she's got her book club to keep her occupied." I could perfectly picture his dismissive wave without seeing it. "Maybe she'll redecorate a room or two while I'm gone." The truth? I had already secured the anchor financing for the Seattle project through Horizon's network of investors who prioritized green development. The truth was that while Robert brought home a respectable income from Mitchell Properties, it was my investment capital that had funded the company's expansion into the sustainable building space that had revitalized their struggling business 3 years ago. I should have confronted him, walked into the living room with the appetizers and casually mentioned my latest investment returns. I should have done it any of the dozen previous times I'd overheard similar conversations. Instead, I quietly placed the tray on the counter and slipped upstairs to my home office. My laptop illuminated the darkened room as I opened an email I'd received earlier that day. The one I'd been planning to discuss with Robert when he got home, before his impromptu boys' night materialized. "Ms. Mitchell," it began, "we're pleased to inform you that Emerald Partners has accepted your equity offer for the Westlake development, contingent upon verification of funds and final contract negotiations." My fingers hovered over the keyboard as a plan crystallized in my mind. I'd been playing small, not just in my investments but in my marriage, minimizing my accomplishments to protect Robert's fragile ego, downplaying my growing success to maintain his comfortable illusion of being the family's financial authority. That ended tonight. The investment strategy I'd been cautiously developing for months suddenly shifted in my mind. More ambitious, more calculated. I wouldn't just be finalizing the Emerald Partners deal. I was going to transform the landscape of my marriage and Robert's business entirely. Robert's laughter drifted through the floor as I logged into my investment portfolio and confirmed what I already knew. I had more than enough capital available to execute my plan. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia, my financial advisor, and the only person who knew the full extent of Horizon's operations. Callaway Group is looking for a silent partner on the Portland Heights project. Perfect opportunity to expand your sustainable portfolio. Interested? Another piece falling into place. I texted back, "Very. Meeting tomorrow, 7:30 a.m., bringing coffee, Major moves happening. By the time Robert's friends left 3 hours later, I had drafted a comprehensive acquisition strategy, initiated contact with the Westlake Development Group's competitors, and emailed my attorney to schedule an urgent meeting about corporate structure modifications. When Robert stumbled into our bedroom, slightly intoxicated and smelling of expensive bourbon, I was already pretending to be asleep. "Annie," he whispered, jostling my shoulder. "You missed a good night. The guys were asking about you." I remained motionless, controlling my breathing, while mentally calculating how soon I could arrange a meeting with Victor Chambers without Robert's knowledge. "I've been thinking," Robert continued, apparently not bothered by my lack of response. "We should use some of our savings to renovate my downtown office. Clients and investors visit, and it needs to reflect our success better." Our savings, the personal account I allowed Robert to believe represented our joint financial resources, was a fraction of my actual wealth. The renovation he wanted would cost $50,000 at most. I had just committed to a $12 million investment in the Westlake property. But Robert wouldn't know that. He'd never asked to see my complete financial records, never inquired about my investment strategy, never treated my financial acumen as anything more than cute dabbling. Tomorrow would begin something new. Not just for my investment portfolio, but for my marriage. As Robert fell into a bourbon-aided sleep beside me, I finally allowed myself to drift off. Dreams filled with boardrooms, investment returns, and the sweet satisfaction of success that was entirely my own. The Emerald Partners' downtown headquarters impressed even me, and I'd become rather difficult to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Portland and the distant mountains, while the reception area featured sustainable materials that showcased the company's commitment to green building practices. "Ms. Mitchell," said Daniel Reed, extending his hand. As Emerald's CEO, he'd built a reputation for innovative development projects that revitalized urban spaces while prioritizing environmental responsibility. "It's a pleasure to finally meet in person after all our email exchanges." "Likewise," I replied, accepting his handshake with the firm grip I reserved for business interactions. "Your Pioneer Square project last year was impressive. The integration of historical preservation with modern sustainability principles set new standards." Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly, clearly not expecting such specific knowledge. "You follow our work closely." "I follow all quality development in the Pacific Northwest," I said simply. "Shall we discuss Westlake?" Sophia joined us in the conference room, her tablet ready with our presentation materials. At 34, she'd been my first hire when I established Horizon Investments 5 years ago. With a background in sustainable finance and a Harvard MBA, she'd walked away from a prestigious position at Goldman Sachs after they repeatedly passed her over for promotion in favor of less qualified men. "We've prepared a comprehensive proposal," Sophia began, sending documents to the screen at the front of the room. "Based on our analysis, we're prepared to provide 60% of the required capital for Westlake, with structured releases tied to development milestones." I watched Daniel and his team exchange glances. Our offer exceeded the standard equity participation they typically accepted, which would give us significant control over the project's direction. "That's substantially more than we discussed initially," Daniel noted, leaning forward. "What's driving your interest in such deep involvement?" "The future of development is sustainable, community-integrated spaces," I answered confidently. "Westlake represents the perfect opportunity to demonstrate how profitable that approach can be when executed correctly. We're not just financially invested, we're philosophically aligned with your vision." What I didn't mention was that Robert's company had been aggressively pursuing this same project for months, unaware that Emerald Partners had already moved on to serious negotiations with other investors. My husband believed his charm and business reputation would eventually win over Daniel, not realizing that his outdated approach to development, prioritizing quick profits over sustainable design, had already eliminated him from consideration. The meeting progressed smoothly, with specific terms being negotiated and timelines established. As Sophia displayed our proposed corporate structure for the project, Daniel paused. "Horizon Investments will be the entity of record?" he asked, studying the diagram. "Not the Mitchell family office?" I met his gaze steadily. "Horizon is my company. It operates independently from Mitchell Properties." "I see," Daniel replied, a new understanding dawning in his expression. "And does Robert Mitchell know about this arrangement?" The question hung in the air, its implications clear. Portland's business community was small enough that connections between major players were widely known. Robert had likely mentioned his interest in Westlake to Daniel personally. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "My investment activities are separate from my husband's business operations," I stated, neither confirming nor denying Daniel's real question. "All legal structures are properly established, if that's your concern." Daniel nodded slowly. "No. Concern. Just clarifying the landscape." By the end of the meeting, we had a preliminary agreement in place. Horizon Investments would provide the majority capital for Westlake's development, with Emerald Partners maintaining operational control of the project. The signing was scheduled for the following week, after our respective legal teams finalized the details. As we left the Emerald offices, Sophia waited until we reached the privacy of my car to speak freely. "That was masterful," she said, unable to contain her smile. "But Anna, does Robert really not know about Horizon? About any of this?" I pulled into the morning traffic, navigating toward our next meeting with practiced ease. "He knows I manage some investments. He assumes they're small-scale conservative positions that I dabble in between charity luncheons." "And he's never questioned where the additional capital for Mitchell Properties came from 3 years ago when they expanded?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Robert believes he secured that financing through his banking relationships. In reality, the bank connected him with an anonymous investment group interested in sustainable development." "Horizon," Sophia said, shaking her head in amazement. "Precisely." The anonymity had been essential. If Robert had known I was essentially saving his company during their financial crisis, his pride would have never recovered. Instead, he'd spent the past 3 years taking full credit for the company's revitalization, building his reputation on projects made possible by my capital. "And now you're about to secure Westlake right from under him," Sophia observed. "What happens when he finds out?" It was the question I'd been considering all night. "That depends on him," I replied as we pulled into the parking garage for our next meeting. "On whether he's capable of seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in our marriage." The rest of the day unfolded in a carefully orchestrated sequence of meetings, with attorneys to restructure Horizon's corporate entities for the Westlake project, with potential partners for additional opportunities, and finally, most delicately, with Victor Chambers. I'd selected a quiet restaurant across town for our meeting, far from Robert's usual haunts. Victor arrived precisely on time, his expression shifting from confusion to curiosity when he realized I was alone. "Mrs. Mitchell," he greeted me, taking the seat across from mine. "I must admit your invitation was unexpected." "Please call me Anna," I replied, sliding a folder across the table. "And I believe this will clarify why I wanted to meet." Victor opened the folder, his eyes widening as he reviewed the contents. Preliminary plans for a competing development adjacent to the Seattle project he and Robert were pursuing together. "This is," he began, looking up at me with new assessment in his gaze. "A potential complication for your Seattle project," I finished for him. "Or an opportunity, depending on your perspective." Victor studied me carefully. "Does Robert know you're approaching me with this?" "Robert doesn't know many things," I said simply, "including the fact that I control enough capital to either support your joint venture or effectively render it non-viable through competition. For the next hour, I outlined a proposition that would ultimately benefit both Victor's company and my investment goals, while significantly reducing Robert's role in the Seattle development. It wasn't personal vindictiveness driving my strategy. It was years of business acumen that Robert had dismissed, now being deployed with surgical precision. Victor was no fool. By the time we finished our lunch, he understood exactly what I was offering and what I expected in return. "You realize this will fundamentally change your husband's position in the project," he said as we concluded our discussion. "I'm counting on it," I replied, maintaining steady eye contact. "The question is whether you're interested in the superior arrangement I'm proposing." Victor extended his hand across the table. "I believe we have an understanding, Mrs. Mitchell. Or should I say, the representative of Horizon Investments." I shook his hand firmly. "For now, let's keep those identities separate. The timing of their convergence is rather important to me." When I returned home that evening, Robert was already there, unusually early for a weekday. He was in his home, office, surrounded by papers and wearing the frustrated expression I'd come to recognize as his response to business complications. "Tough day?" I asked from the doorway, maintaining the supportive wife persona I'd perfected over the years. Robert ran a hand through his hair. "Victor's suddenly making noise about restructuring the Seattle deal, after months of negotiations. Says his investors are concerned about the financial projections." I made a sympathetic noise, hiding the satisfaction that bloomed in my chest. Victor had moved even more quickly than I'd anticipated. "Maybe it's just a negotiating tactic," I suggested mildly. "More coffee?" "Please," Robert sighed, leaning back in his chair. "And the Westlake? Project is going sideways, too. Daniel Reed isn't returning my calls, and I just heard a rumor that Emerald's already found their financing elsewhere." "That does sound frustrating," I replied, turning toward the kitchen. "Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. Perhaps a fresh perspective tomorrow will help." As I prepared our meal, I considered the rapid acceleration of my plan. Within a single day, the two major projects Robert had been counting on for Mitchell Properties' continued growth were being systematically removed from his control. The speed was satisfying, but also concerning. I needed to ensure my legal protections were fully in place before the inevitable confrontation. That night, as Robert restlessly tossed beside me, I sent a final email to my attorney confirming our strategy. The response came immediately. "All structures secure. Proceed as discussed." Tomorrow would bring the next phase, and with it, the beginning of the end of Robert's illusions about both his business acumen and his marriage. The truth about power is that it often operates invisibly until suddenly it doesn't. For 8 years, I had allowed Robert to believe he held the financial authority in our relationship, while quietly amassing the leverage that would eventually force a reckoning. Now that leverage was about to become visible. The Seattle project imploded on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing quarterly investment reports in my home office when Robert burst through the front door at 10:30 a.m., hours before he should have been home. His footsteps thundered up the stairs, and I quickly switched my computer screen to a neighborhood garden club newsletter before he appeared in my doorway. "Victor completely blindsided us," he announced without preamble, his face flushed with anger. "He brought in some mystery investor who's now demanding controlling interest in the Seattle project. They're threatening to develop the adjacent property if we don't agree to their terms." I closed my laptop and gave him my full attention. "That sounds serious. What did James say?" "James is panicking." Robert paced the room, too agitated to stand still. "We've already sunk nearly $800,000 into preliminary work. If we lose this deal or get pushed into a minor position..." He trailed off, the implications clear. "Do you know who this investor is?" I asked carefully. "Some fund called Horizon Investments," he spat the name. Nobody seems to know much about them except they've been quietly acquiring sustainable development projects across the Northwest. I maintained a neutral expression, though my heart raced. This was happening faster than I'd planned. Victor had clearly decided to accelerate matters for his own advantage. What are your options? I kept my voice calm, supportive. Robert collapsed into the armchair across from my desk. Limited. We can either accept a significantly reduced role in profit share, walk away and take the loss, or try to find enough capital to buy out Victor's position entirely, which would take millions we don't have immediate access to. I nodded sympathetically. That's a difficult position. And that's not even the worst part, Robert continued, loosening his tie with a sharp tug. I just heard from Daniel Reed's assistant. Emerald Partners has officially declined our bid for the Westlake project. They've partnered with, guess who, Horizon Investments. The moment hung between us. Robert lost in his professional crisis, while I carefully considered my next move. The timeline had accelerated, but my strategy remained sound. I'm sorry, I said, closing my garden club newsletter. It sounds like this Horizon group is becoming a real problem for Mitchell Properties. They're systematically targeting every major project we've been pursuing, Robert agreed, oblivious to the irony. If this continues, we could be in serious trouble by the end of the quarter. I studied my husband, the man who had consistently underestimated me for years, who had built his identity around being the financial provider and business authority in our relationship. Part of me wanted to extend this moment, to let him experience the uncertainty that comes from having your professional future controlled by forces you don't understand. But another part recognized that the groundwork had been sufficiently laid. I might be able to help, I said quietly. Robert looked up, confusion momentarily displacing his anger. What? With your situation, I might be able to help. He gave a dismissive chuckle, a sound I'd heard countless times when I offered business insights. I appreciate that, Annie, but this is complicated business finance. We need serious capital and strategic partnerships. I'm aware, I replied, opening my desk drawer and removing a leather portfolio embossed with the Horizon Investments logo. That's precisely what I'm offering. Robert's expression shifted from dismissal to confusion as I placed the portfolio on my desk. What is this? The solution to your problem? I said simply, sliding it toward him. Though it will require some significant adjustments to your understanding of our situation. With growing bewilderment, Robert opened the portfolio and began reviewing the documents inside. Corporate filings, investment summaries, partnership agreements. His face paled as comprehension slowly dawned. This can't be right, he muttered, flipping through pages with increasing agitation. This says you're that you control. He looked up, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in our marriage. Your Horizon Investments? I founded Horizon 5 years ago, I confirmed calmly. We currently manage just over $40 million in capital, primarily invested in sustainable development projects across the Pacific Northwest. Robert stared at me as though I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. But your garden, club, the charity committees, take approximately 6 hours of my month, I finished for him. The rest of my time is spent managing investments, developing strategic partnerships, and growing a business that has consistently outperformed market benchmarks. All this time, he said slowly, when I thought you were just playing at being a businesswoman, I supplied. Managing our household while you handled the real finances, supporting your career while dabbling in little hobbies that kept me occupied. The directness of my words made him flinch. Good. I needed him to feel the full weight of his miscalculation. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. It was the question I'd anticipated, the one that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what had happened between us. I did, Robert, repeatedly. I told you about my interest in sustainable investment. I shared market insights. I suggested partnership opportunities. And every single time, you smiled indulgently and changed the subject to your own projects. He seemed about to protest, then stopped, perhaps mentally reviewing years of conversations in a new light. 3 years ago, I continued, when Mitchell Properties was struggling to secure financing for its expansion into sustainable building. Who do you think provided the capital through that anonymous investment group the bank connected you with? Robert's eyes widened with shock. That was you. Horizon made a strategic investment in Mitchell Properties because I believed in the potential of shifting your business model toward sustainability. Not because you convinced some mysterious investor of your brilliant vision, as you've been telling everyone for 3 years. The color drained from his face as the implications became clear. So, the Seattle project, Westlake. You've been protecting my investments and expanding my portfolio, I confirmed. Though I had planned a more gradual revelation of these facts, Victor accelerated matters by approaching my representatives directly once he realized who was behind Horizon. Robert sank deeper into his chair, the portfolio lying open on his lap. I don't understand why you would keep this secret from me. We're married. We're supposed to be partners. The irony of his statement was almost too much. I allowed myself a moment before responding, choosing my words carefully. Are we partners, Robert? Or am I the wife who keeps things running smoothly? At home while you handle the real business and build the Mitchell empire. I quoted his own words from the evening with his colleagues. He had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't mean... You did, I interrupted gently. You absolutely meant it. You've spent our entire marriage believing that your business acumen was superior, that your financial contributions were primary, and that my interests were cute hobbies that kept me appropriately occupied between charity luncheons. Robert stared at the documents, reality continuing to reshape itself around him. So what happens now? He finally asked. Are you deliberately trying to undermine Mitchell Properties? Is this some kind of revenge? This is business, I clarified. Horizon is making strategic investments aligned with our sustainability goals and projected return requirements. The fact that these investments affect Mitchell Properties is a consequence of our overlapping markets, not personal vindictiveness. Even as I said it, I recognized the partial truth in my words. My business decisions were sound, but I had deliberately orchestrated this revelation, this moment when Robert would be forced to recognize the reality of who I was and what I had built. So where does that leave us? He asked, gesturing vaguely between us. As a couple, I mean. It was the question I'd been asking myself for months, ever since I'd decided to stop hiding my success. What kind of marriage could survive such a fundamental recalibration? That depends entirely on your ability to see me differently, I answered honestly. To recognize me as an equal, not just in platitudes, but in your genuine understanding of my capabilities and contributions. Robert nodded slowly, still processing. And Mitchell Properties? What happens with the Seattle project and Westlake? Those are business decisions, I said. Horizon is open to partnership structures that benefit all parties, provided our investment criteria are met. You're saying I need to negotiate with my wife to save my company, he clarified, a hint of his old defensiveness returning. No, I corrected firmly. You need to negotiate with Horizon Investments, a separate business entity that happens to be controlled by your wife, whom you now recognize as a sophisticated investor with significant capital at her disposal. The distinction was important, not just legally, but psychologically. This wasn't a personal negotiation between husband and wife. It was a business reality that required Robert to acknowledge my professional standing. I need time to think, he said finally, closing the portfolio and standing up. This is a lot to process. Of course, I agreed. Sofia Garcia is my chief investment officer. Her contact information is in the portfolio when you're ready to discuss business matters. Robert paused at the door, turning back to look at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Confusion, hurt, perhaps a reluctant admiration. All these years, he said quietly, I had no idea who I was really married to. That's the problem in a nutshell, I replied, but now you have the opportunity to find out. After he left, I sat motionless in my office, the weight of the confrontation settling around me. The revelation had been necessary, overdue even, but I took no joy in Robert's distress. What I felt instead was a complex mixture of validation and uncertainty. The careful compartmentalization of my life, business genius by day, supportive wife by evening, had crumbled, and what would emerge from the rubble remained to be seen. My phone buzzed with a text from Sofia. Victor just called, says Robert knows everything. How are you? I typed back, managing. Prepare the Seattle proposal options for review. Robert will reach out when he's ready. The message sent, I turned to the window overlooking our carefully landscaped garden. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had indeed created this garden, nurturing each plant with attention and care, just as I'd built Horizon from the ground up. Robert had simply failed to recognize that the same woman could do both with equal competence. Robert didn't return home that night. Around 9 p.m., he texted to say he was staying at the downtown Marriott, taking time to think. I acknowledged his message without argument, understanding that his pride required space to adjust to our new reality. In his absence, I found myself wandering through our house, seeing it through new eyes. Our home had always been my domain. The space Robert expected me to maintain and beautify while he built his business empire. Now those carefully maintained boundaries had dissolved, and everything from our wedding photos to the furniture arrangements seemed to belong to a life that no longer quite fit. The next morning, Sofia called as I was making coffee. Victor's legal team reached out, she reported. They're proposing a three-way partnership structure for Seattle that minimizes Mitchell Properties' financial exposure but preserves their operational involvement. Send me the details, I replied, and schedule a formal meeting for Friday. All parties, neutral location. Including Robert? Sofia clarified. Especially Robert, I confirmed. It's time to establish our new working relationship. After hanging up, I noticed an email from Daniel Reed at Emerald Partners, confirming our signing appointment for the Westlake development. The timing was significant. Robert would need to decide how to engage with Horizon on the Seattle project before knowing whether I would include Mitchell Properties in the Westlake opportunity. The business chess match was proceeding exactly as I'd planned, but the personal implications remained uncertain. As much as I had needed to assert my professional identity, I hadn't fully decided what I wanted from our marriage moving forward. Robert returned home that evening looking exhausted, but composed. He placed his overnight bag by the stairs and found me in the kitchen preparing dinner. "We need to talk," he said, his tone more measured than during our previous conversation. I turned down the heat under the pan of sautéing vegetables. "I agree." I spent most of last night and today reviewing everything I could find about Horizon Investments, he began, leaning against the counter. "Your track record is remarkable. The sustainability focus, the community integration elements, the return margins. It's everything I've been trying to achieve with Mitchell Properties, executed at a level I haven't matched." The admission clearly cost him something, but he delivered it without qualification, a promising sign. "Thank you," I said simply. "I also thought about how many times you tried to share insights or suggestions that I dismissed." He met my gaze directly. "I was wrong to do that, consistently wrong for years." "Yes, you were," I agreed. neither softening the truth nor sharpening it with unnecessary anger. Robert nodded, accepting the assessment. I've called a meeting with James and our executive team tomorrow to brief them on the situation. They need to understand that any future relationship with Horizon will be handled as a standard business partnership, not as a matter of personal connection. That's appropriate, I said, returning to my cooking. Sophia mentioned Victor's team has reached out with a preliminary proposal for Seattle. They have, Robert confirmed. The terms are actually more favorable than I expected, given the leverage Horizon currently holds. I smiled slightly. We're interested in successful projects and productive partnerships, not punitive conditions. Vindictiveness is rarely profitable in the long term. Robert was quiet for a moment, watching me move efficiently around the kitchen. I keep thinking about all the business dinners, the social events where I introduced you as my wife, Anna, before turning to talk business with the men in the room. All while you were probably the most financially sophisticated person there. The observation was surprisingly insightful, acknowledging not just his underestimation of me but the social dynamics that had reinforced it. It wasn't just you, I acknowledged, placing plates on the counter. The entire structure of your business world made it easy to overlook women's financial capabilities. I chose to use that blind spot rather than fight it directly. By building a $40 million investment firm without anyone noticing, he said, a hint of reluctant admiration in his voice. People see what they expect to see, I replied. No one expected the garden club enthusiast to be analyzing sustainable development opportunities and structuring multi-million-dollar investment vehicles. We ate dinner in a strange new atmosphere, not the comfortable routine of our previous life nor the tense confrontation of yesterday, but something tentative and exploratory. Robert asked specific questions about Horizon's investment strategy, my decision-making process, and future growth plans. I answered openly, no longer filtering my expertise or downplaying my accomplishments. After dinner, as we sat with glasses of wine in the living room, Robert finally addressed the question that had been hovering between us. Where does this leave our marriage? He asked directly. Can we move forward from here? I considered the question carefully. That depends on whether this revelation has fundamentally changed how you see me, or if you're simply adjusting to an unexpected shift in our financial power dynamic. What's the difference? He asked, genuinely seeking to understand. The difference is whether you now value my judgment, intelligence, and capabilities for what they are, or whether you're just reacting to the discovery that I control significant capital. I held his gaze steadily. One is about seeing me as your equal. The other is about seeing me as a powerful investor you need to accommodate. Robert was silent for a long moment, considering this distinction. I think it's both. He finally admitted. I'm reacting to the power shift. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But I'm also seeing capacities in you that I completely failed to recognize before. And that's changing how I understand who you are. The honesty was refreshing, even if the answer was complicated. That's a start, I acknowledged, but rebuilding trust will take time. For 8 years, I've been treated as less than your equal in the domain where I excel. That doesn't disappear with one revelation, no matter how dramatic. What would rebuilding that trust look like to you? He asked. It was the right question, not defensiveness, not promises, but an inquiry into my needs and expectations. Professional respect, consistently demonstrated, I began. No more dismissive comments about my hobbies or assumptions about my capabilities. Equal partnership in financial decisions affecting our household, and a willingness to acknowledge your past behavior and its impact, even in uncomfortable moments. Robert nodded slowly. Those seem like reasonable expectations. He paused, then added, I'd also like to understand why you felt you couldn't tell me about Horizon directly, what that says about our communication and trust. The observation was surprisingly insightful. not just focusing on his mistakes, but questioning the dynamic we had both participated in creating. "That's fair," I agreed. "We should explore that together." The negotiation table at Portland's Heathman Hotel private dining room felt like a battlefield with carefully drawn lines. Victor Chambers sat with his legal team on one side. Robert and James occupied the opposite end with Mitchell Properties corporate counsel. Sophia and I positioned ourselves at the head of the table, the physical arrangement subtly reinforcing Horizon's controlling position in these discussions. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, a deliberate departure from the casual, feminine attire Robert was accustomed to seeing me in. My portfolio and tablet were arranged precisely before me, the Horizon Investments logo prominently displayed. This meeting wasn't just about the Seattle project. It was about establishing my professional identity in the eyes of everyone present. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice calm and authoritative. "We're here to finalize the partnership structure for the Seattle waterfront development. Horizon has reviewed the proposals from both Mitchell Properties and Chambers Development and believes we can create an arrangement that serves all parties' interests." Robert's expression remained carefully neutral, though I caught the flicker of tension in his jaw. This was his first time seeing me operate in a formal business setting, commanding the attention of seasoned executives and legal teams. Whatever private reconciliation we might be working toward, this public recalibration was clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Mitchell," Victor began. "Ms. Mitchell is fine," I corrected smoothly. "Or Anna, if you prefer. But in this context, you're addressing me as the managing director of Horizon Investments." Victor nodded, recalibrating. "Of course. Anna, the revised equity structure your team proposed yesterday shifts considerable operational control to Mitchell Properties while maintaining Horizon's primary capital position. I'm curious about the reasoning." "Mitchell Properties has stronger operational capacity in the Seattle market," I explained simply. "Their existing relationships with local contractors and familiarity with municipal regulations represent value that pure capital can't provide. This structure maximizes each partner's strengths." Robert's eyes met mine briefly across the table, a flicker of surprise at my assessment. For the next 2 hours, we navigated complex negotiations, profit sharing, structures, development timelines, sustainability benchmarks that would trigger performance bonuses. I directed the discussion with precision, deferring to Sophia on financial projections and acknowledging expertise from both Robert and Victor when appropriate. What became increasingly clear to everyone in the room was that this was not a wife helping her husband's business. This was a sophisticated investor orchestrating a complex deal that happened to include her husband's company. When we broke for lunch, James cornered me by the coffee service, his expression a mixture of bewilderment and newfound respect. "Robert tried to explain your situation," he said awkwardly, "but seeing you in action is something else entirely. How long have you been running Horizon?" 5 years, I replied, adding cream to my coffee. "Though we only moved into larger development projects in the last 3. James shook his head in amazement. "All those dinners at your house, talking about Mitchell Properties while you were building your own investment firm right under our noses." "Not under your noses," I corrected. "In plain sight. I've mentioned my investment interests at least a dozen times during those dinners." No one thought to ask follow-up questions. The observation landed with precision. James had the grace to look embarrassed. "Fair point," he conceded. "For what it's worth, I owe you an apology for some dismissive comments I've made over the years." "Appreciated," I said simply. "Though what matters more is recognizing competence regardless of its packaging going forward." As James returned to Robert, I caught my husband watching our interaction intently. His business partner was clearly saying something significant to him, gesturing in my direction. Robert's expression shifted through several emotions before settling into something that looked remarkably like pride. When negotiations resumed, The dynamic had subtly shifted. Robert engaged more directly with my proposals, neither deferential nor challenging, but collaborative. By late afternoon, we had a framework agreement that satisfied all parties. Horizon maintained majority investment control, Mitchell Properties, secured operational leadership, and Chambers Development received preferential terms on future phases. I believe we have the foundation for a successful partnership, I concluded, as the legal teams finalized documentation. Assuming the sustainability benchmarks are met, this should be the first of several joint ventures. As the meeting adjourned, Robert approached me while the others gathered their materials. "That was impressive," he said quietly. "The way you balanced everyone's interests while protecting Horizon's position." "Thank you," I replied, organizing my notes. "Your input on the construction phasing was valuable." "This is strange," he admitted with a small smile. "Negotiating with my wife as a business equal." "Not equal," I corrected gently. "In this room, I had the controlling position. That's a reality you'll need to become comfortable with professionally." Robert absorbed this, then nodded. "Fair enough. Are you heading home or do you have other meetings?" "I'm meeting with Daniel Reed at Emerald to finalize the Westlake details," I said, checking my watch. "Probably won't be home until after 7. "Should I make dinner?" he offered, the role reversal not lost on either of us. "That would be nice," I replied with a small smile. "Thank you." As I gathered my things, Victor approached, waiting until Robert had moved away before speaking. "You know, when you approached me about reworking the Seattle deal, I thought you were just a scorned wife looking to cause problems for your husband," he admitted in a low voice. "I've rarely been so wrong about someone." "A common miscalculation," I replied, closing my portfolio, one that has often worked to my advantage. Victor studied me with newfound respect. "Will Horizon be looking at the Harrison Street development? I heard Landmark Capital is shopping for partners." "We're conducting preliminary assessment," I confirmed, revealing nothing about Horizon's serious interest in the project. "Why, do you ask?" "Mitchell doesn't have the capital to participate at the level required," Victor observed. "But with their operational expertise and your financial backing, we might consider a joint proposal." The suggestion was intriguing, a sign that our business relationship might evolve beyond the current project if properly managed. "Have your team send over the prospectus," I replied. "We'll take a look." As I left the Heathmen and headed toward my next meeting, I reflected on the subtle shift taking place. For years, I had operated Horizon from the shadows, using the power of being underestimated to build something substantial. Now I was stepping into the light, claiming the professional recognition I had earned, and surprisingly, it felt less like vindication and more like finally being able to breathe fully. The Westlake signing proceeded efficiently, Daniel Reed and his team now fully aware of who they were partnering with. By the time I arrived home that evening, the foundation of my professional world had fundamentally shifted. Horizon was no longer my secret success, but an acknowledged force in Portland's development community. Robert had prepared a simple but elegant dinner, complete with a bottle of wine chilling in an ice bucket. The domestic scene might have appeared unchanged to an outside observer, but the energy between us had transformed completely. "Westlake finalized?" he asked as I set my portfolio aside. "Signed and executed," I confirmed, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "Construction begins next month." Robert nodded, bringing our plates to the table. "James couldn't stop talking about you after the meeting. I think you've gained an admirer." "Professional respect is all I'm interested in," I replied, taking my seat. "Well, you've certainly earned that today." Robert sat across from me, his expression thoughtful. "It was strange being on the other side of the table from you, but educational. You're formidable in a negotiation." "Years of practice," I said, sampling the pasta he'd prepared. "This is good, by the way." "Thanks. I had time to actually follow the recipe for once," He hesitated, then added, I spoke with Mitchell's board this afternoon. Brought them up to speed on the Horizon situation and the Seattle partnership. I raised an eyebrow. How did they take it? Initially shocked, then concerned about what it meant for company leadership. He met my gaze directly. I assured them that while our marital relationship had obviously evolved, the business partnership was sound and potentially advantageous for Mitchell Properties. The distinction was important, acknowledging both the personal and professional dimensions of our new reality without conflating them. And do you believe that? I asked. That our business partnership could be advantageous for Mitchell? Robert considered the question seriously. Yes. After watching you today, your strategic thinking, your command of sustainability metrics and their market implications, I'd be a fool not to recognize the potential benefits of alignment with Horizon. Even with the power differential? I pressed. That's the challenging part, he admitted. I've spent my career being the decision maker, the person with financial authority. Adjusting to a partner with greater capital resources and, frankly, more sophisticated investment strategies, that's a significant recalibration. His honesty was refreshing. No defensiveness, no attempt to reassert dominance, just a clear-eyed assessment of our new professional dynamic. I appreciate your candor, I said, and I should clarify that while Horizon will maintain its independent operation and investment criteria, I'm open to identifying strategic opportunities where Mitchell's operational strengths complement our capital resources. A genuine business partnership, Robert suggested. Exactly. Evaluated on merit and mutual benefit, not marital obligation. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the implications of this arrangement. There's something I've been wondering, Robert said finally. The Mitchell Properties expansion 3 years ago, the sustainable building initiative that saved the company during the market downturn, was that your idea originally? I set down my fork, considering how much to reveal. The concept came from a conversation we had at the Hendersons' dinner party. You mentioned that traditional development was facing increasing regulatory challenges, and I suggested sustainable building might represent an untapped market opportunity. I remember you saying something about green building trends, Robert acknowledged, but I don't recall it being a detailed business strategy. Because when I started to elaborate, you patted my hand and said, "That's an interesting thought, honey," before turning to discuss market cycles with David. The memory was precise, the dismissal still clear in my mind years later. Robert winced at the description. So you decided to fund the idea yourself, through Horizon, rather than trying to convince me directly. It was a sound investment opportunity, I explained. The anonymous structure protected your pride while allowing the idea to be implemented. Robert was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. And how many other conversations have we had where I dismissed ideas that you later implemented successfully? Through Horizon? Several, I admitted. Your skepticism about mixed-use developments in the Pearl District. Your dismissal of community-integrated retail spaces. Your resistance to incorporating renewable energy systems despite the tax advantages. Each example landed like a small stone, building a monument to opportunities missed through his unwillingness to genuinely hear me. I've been a fool, he said simply. Not a fool, I corrected. Just a man who couldn't see past certain assumptions about his wife's capabilities. Same difference, Robert replied with a self-deprecating smile. Then, more seriously, I'm sorry, Anna. Not just for the professional disrespect, but for creating a marriage where you felt you needed to hide your success. The apology was direct and unqualified, another positive sign in our evolving relationship. Thank you, I said. That means something. After dinner, we moved to the living room with fresh glasses of wine, the conversation shifting toward practical considerations. We should discuss our financial arrangements, Robert suggested. Now that everything's in the open, it seems absurd to maintain separate systems. I agree on transparency, I replied, but Horizon's assets and operations must remain legally distinct from our personal finances and your business interests. Of course, he quickly agreed. I meant our household finances, investment accounts, retirement planning, areas where we've been operating with incomplete information, or where you've been operating under certain assumptions about the scope of my contribution, I added. Robert acknowledged this with a nod. Exactly. I'd like to understand the complete picture and establish a more equitable approach moving forward. We spent the next hour reviewing our financial landscape, Robert explaining Mitchell Properties' current position and growth strategy, me outlining Horizon's structure and investment portfolio. For the first time in our marriage, we were having a genuinely equal conversation about finances, each bringing professional expertise to the discussion. Your return metrics are impressive, Robert observed, studying the performance data I'd shared. Consistently outperforming traditional development by leveraging sustainability premiums and community integration benefits. The market increasingly values those elements, I explained, particularly among younger urban professionals with disposable income. Mitchell should be adapting more aggressively in that direction, he acknowledged. We've been cautious, treating sustainability as an add-on rather than a core strategy. That's where partnership with Horizon could be valuable, I suggested. We have the market research and investment models to support more ambitious sustainability initiatives. As we continued talking, the boundary between personal reconciliation and professional collaboration blurred. Our shared knowledge of development markets and financial structures provided common ground where we could interact as equals, rebuilding trust through professional respect. By the time we finished our wine, we had established a framework for both our household finances and potential business collaboration. Transparency about personal assets, clear boundaries between corporate entities, and identified opportunities for strategic partnership where our respective strengths aligned. This has been the most productive financial discussion we've ever had, Robert observed as we prepared for bed. Though I suppose that's because it's the first one where both participants were fully engaged and informed. The observation contained both acknowledgement of past imbalance and appreciation for our new dynamic. It's the foundation for a different kind of partnership, I agreed, if that's what we both want. Robert paused in the doorway of our bedroom, his expression serious. I want to be absolutely clear about something, Anna. My interest in rebuilding our marriage isn't about Horizon's assets or investment potential. I'm still processing how thoroughly I misjudged you, but what I know with certainty is that I want a relationship with the remarkable woman I'm finally getting to know. The statement was exactly what I needed to hear. Recognition that his perspective had fundamentally shifted beyond mere accommodation of my financial position. That's a good place to start, I replied, allowing myself a small smile, though we still have considerable ground to cover. Over the following weeks, our personal and professional lives reorganized around our new reality. At home, we established patterns that reflected mutual respect and shared responsibility. Robert took on more household management as my public role with Horizon expanded, while I made space for his professional identity, despite the shift in our relative success and influence. In the business community, my emergence as Horizon's visible leader created waves of adjustment. Women in finance and development reached out with both congratulations and knowing commiseration about operating in the shadows. Male colleagues, who had previously dismissed me at social functions, suddenly found reasons to discuss investment opportunities and market trends. Most significantly, the relationship between Horizon and Mitchell Properties evolved into a productive, if carefully managed, partnership. Robert's operational expertise complemented my investment strategy in ways that benefited both companies. The Seattle project moved forward with renewed momentum, and initial explorations of the Harrison Street development showed promise. 1. Evening. About a month after our confrontation, I returned from a sustainability conference to find Robert in his home office, surrounded by project plans and market analyses. "The Riverside concept you suggested," he said without preamble as I appeared in his doorway. "I've been running the numbers and sustainability projections. With Horizon's approach to community integration, the ROI jumps by almost 18% compared to standard development models." I set down my briefcase, pleasantly surprised by his enthusiasm. "The initial capital requirements are higher, but the long-term returns justify the investment." "Exactly," Robert agreed, gesturing me toward the projection models on his screen. "I've restructured the phasing to accommodate those upfront costs while maintaining liquidity benchmarks. Take a look." I reviewed his work, impressed by how thoroughly he'd incorporated the sustainability principles I'd been advocating. "This is good, Robert. Really good." He smiled, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I've been studying Horizon's completed projects, analyzing the elements that drive your performance metrics. There's a consistent pattern in how you balance community amenities with premium residential components." The observation was astute, evidence that he was genuinely engaging with my business approach rather than simply accommodating my position. "It's about creating ecosystems, not just buildings," I explained, pointing to specific elements in his plan. "Each component supports the others, creating value multipliers that traditional development models miss." "I see that now," Robert acknowledged. "It makes Mitchell's previous approach seem outdated, focusing on isolated projects without considering the broader integration opportunities." We spent the next hour refining his concept, our professional knowledge complementing each other in ways that felt surprisingly natural. This was the partnership I had always wanted: equal contribution, mutual respect, genuine collaboration around shared expertise. As we finished, Robert leaned back in his chair, studying me with a thoughtful expression. "You know what the strangest part of all this has been? Realizing that I've been married to you for 8 years without actually knowing you," Robert continued. "The woman I'm working with now, confident, strategically brilliant, uncompromising in negotiations, she's been there all along, and I never saw her." The observation contained both regret and wonder, a recognition of what he had missed through his own limited perspective. "I was complicit in that blindness," I admitted. "I chose concealment over confrontation, building Horizon in the shadows rather than demanding recognition." "Why?" Robert asked, the question simple but profound. "You clearly had the capability to assert yourself. Why allow the misconception to persist for so long?" I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest about motivations I was still fully understanding myself. "Initially, it was pragmatic," I explained. "Being underestimated created opportunities. People revealed information to Robert's wife that they might have withheld from a competitor. Investment patterns went unnoticed because no one connected them to me." "And later?" Robert pressed. "When Horizon was established and successful?" "Habit, partly," I acknowledged. "The compartmentalization worked, so I maintained it. But also..." I paused, confronting a more uncomfortable truth. "I was avoiding the confrontation we eventually had, the moment when you would have to reconcile your perception of me with reality." "You thought I couldn't handle it," Robert said, not accusatory but seeking understanding. "I thought it would force a fundamental recalibration of our marriage," I corrected. "And I wasn't sure what would remain afterward." The admission hung between us, an acknowledgement of the risk we were still navigating, the uncertainty about whether our relationship could successfully transform into something balanced and authentic. "And now?" Robert asked quietly. "Are you still uncertain?" I met his gaze directly. "Less so. Your response has been better than I anticipated. More adaptable, less defensive." "Losing the Seattle project was a humbling experience," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Nothing clarifies perspective like discovering your wife has outmaneuvered you in your own industry. The observation held no bitterness, just a recognition of the irony in our situation. Not outmaneuvered, I clarified, just operated with different priorities and strengths. Robert nodded, acknowledging the distinction, which is why we're potentially stronger as allies than competitors. Professionally, I agreed. The personal reconciliation is still evolving. One day at a time, Robert said, reaching across the desk to take my hand. But I'm learning who you really are, and I like her considerably more than the simplified version I thought I married. The statement was perfect in its simplicity. Recognition of past errors alongside genuine appreciation for my authentic self. For the first time since our confrontation, I felt a settling within me, a sense that perhaps our marriage could indeed evolve into something more balanced and fulfilling than before. The tipping point in both our business relationship and personal reconciliation came unexpectedly, 6 weeks after my revelation. I was reviewing acquisition proposals in my downtown office when my assistant notified me that Robert was here without an appointment. He says it's urgent, she added, clearly uncertain about the protocol for unscheduled visits from the managing director's husband. Send him in, I decided, curious about this departure from our newly established professional boundaries. Robert entered looking simultaneously anxious and excited, a portfolio clutched in his hands. Sorry to barge in, he began, but I've just come from a meeting with Lancaster Development, and there's an opportunity I think you should see immediately. Lancaster? I raised an eyebrow. The company was one of Portland's oldest development firms, traditionally conservative in their approach and notoriously selective about partnerships. What kind of opportunity? Robert spread documents across my desk, his enthusiasm palpable. They're divesting their entire Northeast Portland holdings, 17 properties across 5 neighborhoods, including the old warehouse district. I leaned forward, immediately grasping the significance. The warehouse district had been on Horizon's acquisition watch list for 2 years, a neglected industrial zone with enormous potential for sustainable redevelopment, but always controlled by ownership groups unwilling to sell. Lancaster has owned those properties for generations, I noted, scanning the portfolio summary. Why divest now? Leadership transition, Robert explained. The founder's grandson is taking over, wants to focus on suburban development. They're looking for a single buyer to take the entire portfolio, someone with vision for cohesive neighborhood transformation rather than piecemeal development. The asking price? I asked, already calculating potential structures. $86 million, Robert replied. But here's where it gets interesting. They've had an offer from Meridian Group for $83, all cash, closing in 60 days. Meridian was a national developer known for generic, high-density projects with minimal community integration, precisely the opposite of Horizon's approach. If they acquired the warehouse district, the opportunity for sustainable transformation would be lost. Lancaster is giving us 48 hours to counter, Robert continued. Their preference is a buyer with local ties and sustainable development experience, but the price differential would need to be minimal. I studied him carefully, noting the us in his statement. Why bring this to me directly rather than pursuing it through Mitchell Properties? Because Mitchell doesn't have the capital resources to compete with Meridian's offer, Robert said matter-of-factly. But a joint proposal from Mitchell and Horizon would be competitive both financially and conceptually. Lancaster's transition team specifically mentioned your Westlake approach as the kind of development they'd prefer for these neighborhoods. The proposal represented something significant. Robert bringing me an opportunity where Horizon's strengths were essential, acknowledging without defensiveness that his company needed mine to succeed. This wasn't about marital obligation, but genuine business synergy. We'd need to move quickly, I said, already considering capital structures. Lancaster will require comprehensive redevelopment proposals alongside the financial offer. I've already drafted preliminary concepts for the 3 anchor properties, Robert replied, pulling additional documents from his portfolio. Sustainable mixed-use developments with affordable housing components, community spaces, and green infrastructure integration. I reviewed his designs, impressed by how thoroughly they aligned with Horizon's development philosophy. Robert had clearly been studying our approach, incorporating our sustainability metrics and community integration principles into his own work. "These are excellent," I acknowledged, genuine admiration in my voice. "You've captured the essential balance between market viability and community impact." Robert's expression reflected both pride and relief at my assessment. "I've been paying attention. Your development model consistently outperforms traditional approaches, both financially and socially. It would be professional malpractice not to learn from that." The statement represented exactly the kind of recognition I had wanted from him. Not personal flattery, but professional respect based on objective assessment of results. "So, you're proposing a formal joint venture?" I clarified. "Horizon provides primary capital. Mitchell handles development execution with shared design oversight and sustainability implementation," Robert confirmed. "Equal partnership in concept, though obviously Horizon would maintain majority financial interest given the capital requirements." I considered the proposal from multiple angles. The business opportunity was undeniable, but the personal implications were equally significant. This would be our first major joint project conceived as equals from the beginning, a test case for whether our professional relationship could truly evolve beyond the patterns of the past. "Let me review the complete portfolio and run some projections," I said. "Can you have your team prepare detailed sustainability metrics for the anchor properties by tomorrow morning?" "Already underway," Robert assured me. "James has the research, team working through the night on environmental assessments and community impact projections." His thoroughness and anticipation of my requirements showed how seriously he was taking this partnership, not as Robert's wife helping his business, but as a respected financial partner with specific standards and expectations. "I'll call an emergency meeting of Horizon's investment committee for tomorrow afternoon," I decided. "If the projections support the concept, we could have a preliminary proposal to Lancaster within their 48-hour window." Robert nodded, gathering the materials he'd spread across my desk. "Thank you for considering it. I believe this could be transformative, not just for these neighborhoods, but for how Mitchell and Horizon collaborate going forward." As he prepared to leave, I was struck by the naturalness of our interaction, the easy flow between personal connection and professional respect, neither dimension overwhelming the other. "Robert," I called as he reached the door. "This was well done. Bringing the opportunity, preparing the preliminary concepts, understanding what would matter to me in evaluating the proposal. I appreciate the professionalism." His smile contained a complexity of emotions: pride, gratitude, perhaps a touch of lingering regret for the years of missed collaboration. Coming from Horizon's managing director, that means something. After he left, I sat quietly in my office, processing what had just transpired. For years, I had maintained Horizon as my separate domain, a space where my capabilities could flourish without the constraints of Robert's limited perception. Now, he was actively seeking to bridge that divide, bringing opportunities that acknowledged my expertise and positioned us as genuine partners. The Warehouse District acquisition represented more than just another investment. It was a potential blueprint for our future, both professionally and personally. If we could successfully collaborate as equals on a project of this magnitude, perhaps we could truly build a marriage based on mutual respect rather than comfortable misconception. The next 48 hours unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Horizon's investment team worked alongside Mitchell's development group, creating a comprehensive proposal that combined financial strength with visionary sustainable design. Robert and I moved seamlessly between leadership roles, each deferring to the other's expertise in appropriate domains, without the power struggles that might have characterized our previous interactions. When we presented our joint proposal to Lancaster's board, standing side by side as equal partners, the symmetry of our professional relationship felt both natural and revolutionary. We offered $84 million with accelerated closing terms and a comprehensive redevelopment plan that preserved neighborhood character while transforming industrial spaces into vibrant, sustainable communities. The Horizon Mitchell proposal represents exactly the kind of thoughtful, integrated approach we hoped might emerge, Lancaster's CEO acknowledged as they accepted our offer over Meridian's higher bid. Your combined expertise in sustainable development and community integration aligns perfectly with our vision for these properties' future. As we left the Lancaster offices, Robert turned to me with quiet satisfaction. We make a formidable team when we're actually working together. We do, I agreed, the acknowledgement both professional and deeply personal. Perhaps we should have tried it years ago. Better late than never, he offered, his expression open and hopeful. Though I understand why it took this path to get here. That evening, as we celebrated our successful partnership with dinner at home, the conversation turned reflective. I've been thinking about what you said when you first revealed Horizon, Robert began, refilling our wine glasses. About why you kept your success hidden for so long. And, I prompted, curious about his perspective now that we'd established a more equal footing. I realize I created an environment where your success felt threatening to our relationship, he said carefully. Where you believed, probably correctly, that I couldn't handle knowing the full extent of your capabilities. The admission was significant, not just acknowledging his past behavior, but taking responsibility for the dynamics that had shaped my choices. I contributed to that environment, I acknowledged, by accepting your dismissals rather than challenging them directly, by finding it easier to succeed in secret than to demand recognition. Why do you think that was? Robert asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than defensive. You're clearly capable of asserting yourself professionally. What was different in our marriage? The question cut to the heart of patterns I was still understanding myself. I valued our relationship, I said slowly, and somewhere along the way I accepted the idea that maintaining it required minimizing certain aspects of myself, specifically, the ambitious, financially dominant aspects that might threaten your sense of identity. That's a painful insight, Robert observed quietly. For both of us, I agreed. It suggests a fundamental imbalance in how we valued each other's happiness and fulfillment. Robert nodded, absorbing this. And now? Do you feel you can bring your whole self to our relationship? I'm learning to, I admitted. The Warehouse District project is a good example. Working as genuine partners, each bringing our strengths without either diminishing the other. It feels right, Robert said simply. Seeing you in your professional element, watching how you analyze opportunities and structure investments. It's like discovering entire dimensions of you that I never appreciated before. And does that discovery change how you feel about us? I asked, the question direct but necessary. Robert considered this carefully before answering. It deepens my respect and admiration immeasurably. The woman I thought I married was lovely but incomplete, a partial version of who you really are. Getting to know the complete Anna is like finding something precious I didn't know was missing. The sentiment was exactly what I needed to hear. Not resentment about past deception, but appreciation for the fuller reality now emerging between us. I feel something similar, I acknowledged. Watching you adapt to our new dynamic, seeing how you've engaged with Horizon's approach instead of resisting it. You're showing aspects of flexibility and professional growth I wasn't certain existed. Nothing like discovering your wife has outmaneuvered you financially to spark some personal development, Robert said with a self-deprecating smile, though I prefer to think of it as removing blinders I didn't know I was wearing. The light. moment carried an undercurrent of genuine transformation. Robert acknowledging his past limitations without defensiveness, finding humor in his own growth process. As we continued our celebration, discussing the warehouse district's potential and our vision for its development, I realized we were engaging in exactly the kind of equal partnership I had always wanted, sharing ideas, challenging each other's thinking, building something meaningful together. The road ahead would still require careful navigation. Habits formed over 8 years wouldn't disappear overnight. Professional boundaries between our companies would need ongoing maintenance. The business community would watch our partnership with curiosity and, in some cases, skepticism. But for the first time since revealing my success, I felt genuinely optimistic about our ability to build something new together. A marriage based on authentic recognition rather than comfortable fiction. A partnership where both our capabilities could flourish without artificial constraint. The silent investor had finally found her voice, and remarkably, her husband had proven capable of not just hearing it, but welcoming it as essential to their shared future. 3 months into our joint development of the warehouse district, the transformation extended far beyond the physical properties we were redesigning. Our professional relationship had evolved into a genuine partnership, each of us contributing distinct strengths while respecting the other's expertise. More surprising was how this recalibration had revitalized our personal connection, creating a marriage more balanced and fulfilling than I had imagined possible. On a crisp autumn morning, Robert and I walked through what would become Riverview Commons, the centerpiece of our sustainable community vision. Construction crews were already preparing the site, preserving the historic brick facades while gutting interiors for complete green retrofitting. The community garden space should extend another 20 feet toward the river, I suggested, reviewing the marking stakes. The solar exposure would be significantly better. Robert nodded, making notes on his tablet. We'll need to reconfigure the courtyard flow, but it's worth it for the additional growing capacity. The neighborhood council specifically emphasized urban agriculture access. This easy collaboration, my sustainability insights complementing his design expertise, had become our new normal, allowing each project to benefit from our combined perspective. "Ms. Mitchell," called a voice from across the site. "Daniel." Reed from Emerald Partners approached, navigating around construction equipment. "And Mr. Mitchell. Perfect timing. I was hoping to catch you both." We greeted Daniel warmly, our relationship with him having evolved considerably since the Westlake negotiations. "Impressive scope," he observed, gesturing to the activity surrounding. The comprehensive approach to neighborhood redevelopment is exactly what Portland needs. Sustainable design at community scale rather than isolated projects. That's been Horizon's philosophy from the beginning, I acknowledged, though Mitchell's operational expertise has been essential for implementation at this scale. Robert smiled at the recognition. We each bring different strengths to the table. Anna's investment vision combined with our development capacity has proven remarkably effective. The ease with which he acknowledged my leadership role while confidently claiming his own expertise reflected how far we'd come from the days when he'd dismissed my business acumen. "That's actually why I wanted to speak with you both," Daniel said. The Portland Business Journal is doing a feature on transformative development partnerships. They've asked to profile the Horizon-Mitchell collaboration as their central case study. The request represented a public acknowledgement of our professional relationship, a formal recognition of the partnership we'd been building behind the scenes. "Interesting," I replied, considering the implications. "What aspects are they most focused on?" "The innovative capital structure, the sustainability metrics, the community integration approach," Daniel listed, "but also, frankly, the personal dimension, how you've navigated the transition from traditional marriage to business partnership." Robert and I exchanged glances, silently evaluating our comfort with such public exposure. For years, I had operated Horizon from the shadows, using anonymity as strategic advantage. Robert had presented himself as the family's primary business authority. Going public with our actual dynamic would permanently alter those perceptions. "I think we should do it," Robert said, surprising me with his immediacy. "Our story might help other couples navigate similar transitions," Robert continued, surprising me with his openness. "And it aligns with our commitment to transparency going forward." His willingness to publicly acknowledge our transformed relationship, including the uncomfortable truth of how he had underestimated me for years, represented another significant evolution in his perspective. "I agree," I decided, "provided we maintain some boundaries around the personal details. This should focus primarily on the business partnership." Daniel nodded, understanding the distinction. "The reporter is Layla Sanderson. Very professional. Excellent reputation for business journalism. I can arrange an introduction if you're interested." "Please do," I replied. "We'll make ourselves available for interviews next week." As Daniel departed to make the arrangements, Robert and I continued our site inspection, reviewing construction progress and refining design elements for the adaptive reuse spaces. The ease of our collaboration still occasionally surprised me. The natural flow between personal connection and professional respect that had emerged from the wreckage of our previous dynamic. "The business journal feature will make things official," Robert observed as we concluded our tour. "Everyone in Portland's development community will know the full story of Horizon and Mitchell properties." "Having second thoughts?" I asked, studying his expression for any sign of reservation. "Not at all," he assured me. "Just acknowledging that it's a significant step. Once the article publishes, there's no returning to the old narrative, for either of us." "Good," I said simply. "That narrative never served either of us particularly well." Robert smiled, reaching for my hand as we walked back toward our cars. "The new one is considerably more interesting anyway. Power couple revolutionizes sustainable development through innovative partnership. Much better than businessman builds empire while wife tends garden." His ability to joke about his former perspective was another welcome sign of genuine change. Robert not just accepting our new reality but embracing it without defensiveness. The interview with Layla Sanderson was scheduled for the following Wednesday at Horizon's downtown headquarters. I chose the location deliberately, surrounding Robert and myself with the tangible evidence of what I had built while he remained unaware. The symbolism wasn't about humiliation, but about grounding our story in visible truth. Layla arrived precisely on time, professional and focused as she set up recording equipment in our conference room. "Thank you both for making time for this," she began. "The Horizon Mitchell partnership represents an intriguing evolution in Portland's development landscape. I'm interested in exploring both the business model and the journey that brought you to this collaboration." For the next hour, we outlined the specifics of our partnership, the complementary strengths, the innovative financing structures, the community-centered design philosophy that guided our projects. Layla asked insightful questions about sustainability metrics, affordable housing integration, and economic development impacts, clearly having done substantial research before our meeting. "Now for the more personal dimension," she said, transitioning to the heart of her inquiry. Most of Portland's business community was surprised to learn about Horizon's connection to Mitchell Properties. How did your professional relationship evolve from its rather unconventional beginning? Robert and I exchanged glances, having anticipated this line of questioning. We'd discussed how transparent to be about our past dynamic, ultimately deciding that honest acknowledgement would be more powerful than sanitized corporate messaging. "I made a fundamental error for many years," Robert began, his candor immediately setting the tone. "I failed to recognize Anna's extraordinary financial and strategic capabilities, viewing her primarily as a supportive spouse rather than the sophisticated investor she actually is. And I chose to build Horizon independently rather than challenging that perception directly." I added, sharing responsibility for our dynamic. The result was a professional separation that ultimately benefited neither of us personally nor our respective businesses. Layla leaned forward, clearly intrigued by our honesty. What prompted the change? How did you move from that separation to your current partnership? Necessity, Robert admitted with a small smile. When Anna's role as Horizon's founder became clear during negotiations for key projects, I had a choice: adapt to this new reality or resist it. Fortunately, I chose adaptation. Though not without significant adjustment, I noted, wanting to acknowledge the challenge our transition had presented. Recalibrating both professional and personal relationships after years of established patterns requires ongoing effort from both parties. The effort appears to be yielding results, Layla observed. The Warehouse District acquisition represents the largest sustainable redevelopment initiative in Portland's recent history. It's also the first major project we've approached as genuine partners from inception, Robert explained. Previous collaborations between Horizon and Mitchell emerged from separate initiatives that became interconnected. This represents a truly integrated vision. And that integration extends beyond business strategy? Layla asked, her question delicately probing the personal implications of our professional evolution. I considered how much to reveal, balancing transparency against privacy. Our professional recalibration has naturally influenced our personal relationship, I acknowledged. When fundamental assumptions change in one domain, they inevitably affect others. For the better, Robert added, reaching across the table to briefly touch my hand. Discovering my wife's complete capabilities has been humbling, but ultimately enriching. Our partnership is stronger when neither of us is operating at artificial capacity. The statement was personal, but genuine, conveying the positive transformation without revealing intimate details of our reconciliation process. Layla nodded appreciatively, recognizing the boundaries of our disclosure. The development community often overlooks women's contributions or relegates them to supporting roles, she observed. Has your experience informed how Horizon and Mitchell approach leadership diversity in your organizations? The question provided a perfect opportunity to shift from personal dynamics to broader professional implications. Absolutely, I confirmed. Both companies have implemented specific initiatives to identify and promote talented women in development, finance, and project management. Our executive teams now maintain gender parity, which has measurably improved decision-making processes and community engagement outcomes. The data is unambiguous, Robert added. Projects led by diverse teams consistently outperform homogeneous groups in meeting both financial targets and sustainability metrics. What happened in our marriage? My failure to recognize Anna's capabilities is unfortunately common across the industry. We're committed to addressing those systemic blind spots. As the interview concluded, Layla reviewed her key points and promised to share a draft before publication. Your willingness to acknowledge the evolution of your partnership adds significant dimension to the story, she noted. It creates a narrative about growth and adaptation rather than just business strategy. After she departed, Robert and I remained in the conference room, processing the experience of publicly articulating our transformed relationship. That felt surprisingly cathartic, Robert admitted, acknowledging my past limitations without qualification or defensiveness. You were very forthright, I agreed, appreciating his honesty. It would have been easy to present a more sanitized version of our history. What would be the point? He shrugged. The truth is more compelling anyway. Husband finally recognizes wife's genius after years of obliviousness. It's practically a modern fable. His self-deprecating humor reflected healthy perspective on our journey, neither minimizing his past behavior nor dwelling in perpetual guilt about it. A fable with A surprisingly constructive ending, I observed. Most such stories end with comeuppance, not collaboration. Robert nodded thoughtfully. That's what makes ours worth sharing. The transformation of conflict into partnership offers something more valuable than vindication. The observation struck me as remarkably insightful. My initial revelation of Horizon's existence had contained elements of righteous exposure, forcing Robert to confront his underestimation of me and its consequences. Yet our journey had evolved beyond that moment of reckoning into something more nuanced and ultimately more satisfying than simple vindication. The Business Journal article published 2 weeks later, featuring a photograph of Robert and me standing amid the construction at Riverview Commons. The headline read, "Power Shift: How Horizon Investments and Mitchell Properties Are Redefining Sustainable Development and Partnership." The piece was thoughtful and comprehensive, balancing business analysis with the personal narrative of our professional evolution. The response was immediate and widespread. Business colleagues expressed surprise and admiration. Competitors reassessed their understanding of both companies' positioning. Most gratifyingly, several women in development and finance reached out to share similar experiences of having their capabilities minimized or overlooked, finding encouragement in the public acknowledgement of our transformed relationship. "You've become something of an icon," Robert observed one evening, scrolling through emails on his tablet. "The Portland Business Women's Alliance wants you to deliver their annual keynote address." "So I've heard," I replied, reviewing my own correspondence. "And the Sustainable Development Council has invited us both to present at their conference, specifically addressing how diverse leadership improves project outcomes." The public dimension of our reconciliation had created unexpected opportunities for broader impact, transforming our personal journey into a platform for addressing systemic issues in our industry. 6 months into our partnership on the warehouse district, with construction progressing rapidly and our joint management approach functioning smoothly, we faced an unexpected opportunity that would test the resilience of our new dynamic. Callaway Group is divesting their entire West Coast portfolio, Sophia reported during our weekly strategy meeting. 14 major developments across Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco, including the Portland Heights project we've been monitoring for 2 years. Motivation? I asked, immediately alert to the strategic implications. Restructuring after their merger with Eastern Capital, Sophia explained. They're consolidating resources to focus on East Coast markets. The divestiture is happening quietly. No public announcement yet, but they're approaching selected potential buyers. Acquisition cost? I prompted, already calculating capital requirements. Preliminary estimates suggest approximately $320 million for the complete portfolio, Sophia replied, though they're open to segmented purchases if necessary. The figure was substantial, more than 4 times the warehouse district investment, and well beyond what Horizon could comfortably manage alone without significantly leveraging our existing assets. The Portland Heights and Seattle waterfront properties align perfectly with our sustainability criteria, I noted, reviewing the portfolio summary. The San Francisco developments less so, but they offer strong revenue potential to support the more innovative projects. Mitchell Properties has been pursuing the Portland Heights development for 3 years, Robert interjected. It's the centerpiece of our 5-year growth strategy. The statement wasn't territorial, but informational, Robert ensuring I understood the significance to his company's planning. This transparent communication represented another positive evolution in our professional relationship. Would Mitchell have the capital capacity to acquire that portion independently? I asked, considering potential structures. Not without significantly overextending our resources, Robert acknowledged. We've been planning a targeted approach. When individual properties became available, not a comprehensive acquisition. I nodded, appreciating his candor. So we're potentially looking at another joint venture, but at significantly larger scale than the warehouse district. The opportunity Warrants consideration, Sophia agreed. But the capital requirements would necessitate a more complex partnership structure than our previous collaborations. Let me speak with our executive team, Robert suggested. We should evaluate Mitchell's maximum participation capacity before discussing specific arrangements. Good, I agreed. Sophia and I will model potential acquisition structures with varying levels of Mitchell involvement. Let's reconvene tomorrow afternoon with preliminary frameworks. As the meeting concluded and others departed, Robert remained behind, his expression thoughtful. This is different from our previous collaborations, he observed once we were alone. The scale is substantially larger, I acknowledged, and the competitive dynamics more complex, given Mitchell's existing interest in key properties. That's part of it, Robert agreed. But there's also the question of how our partnership is perceived. After the business journal profile, everyone is watching how we navigate these decisions. This acquisition would essentially cement the Mitchell-Horizon relationship for the foreseeable future. The observation was perceptive, recognizing the symbolic significance beyond the immediate business opportunity. If we proceeded with a joint acquisition of this magnitude, we would be publicly committing to a long-term integrated strategy rather than project-by-project collaboration. Are you concerned about that perception? I asked, studying his expression for any hesitation. Not concerned, Robert clarified. Just aware that we're making decisions with implications beyond the immediate investment. This would fundamentally reshape both companies' trajectories. His awareness of these broader implications reflected how much his perspective had evolved, no longer focused solely on Mitchell's immediate interests, but considering the complex interplay between our business relationship and larger market positioning. We should evaluate the opportunity on its merits, I suggested. If the business case supports collaboration, we can address the structural implications accordingly. Robert nodded, accepting this approach. I'll have comprehensive financial projections for you by tomorrow morning. As promised, our teams reconvened the following afternoon with detailed analyses of potential acquisition strategies. Mitchell's executives presented their maximum participation capacity, approximately $75 million without compromising existing project commitments. Horizon's investment committee outlined various frameworks for covering the remaining capital requirements while ensuring appropriate returns for both entities. The primary challenge is balancing operational control with financial contribution, Sophia explained, displaying modeling projections. Mitchell brings essential development, expertise, and existing relationships with key stakeholders, particularly for the Portland properties. However, Horizon would necessarily provide the majority of acquisition capital. We've modeled a tiered structure, James offered, presenting Mitchell's proposal. Operational leadership allocated by property type and location, with Mitchell taking primary responsibility for Portland developments and collaborative approaches for Seattle and San Francisco. The suggested framework was thoughtful and balanced, acknowledging Horizon's dominant financial position while preserving meaningful roles for Mitchell's expertise. Most significantly, it had been developed by Robert's team without his direct involvement, indicating that the commitment to equitable partnership had permeated both organizations. This approach aligns with our strengths, I observed, reviewing the proposal. And the projected returns justify the capital allocation for both entities. Robert nodded agreement. The integrated development strategy actually enhances the value proposition compared to separate acquisitions, particularly for the sustainability certifications and community integration elements. As discussion continued, refining specific details of the partnership structure, I was struck by the natural evolution of our professional relationship. What had begun as a forced recalibration after my revelation about Horizon had transformed into genuine collaboration, with both organizations recognizing the advantages of our complementary strengths. By meeting's end, we had established a preliminary framework for joint acquisition, Horizon would provide approximately 70% of required capital, with Mitchell contributing the remainder. Operational responsibilities would be allocated based on expertise and existing relationships, with integrated management teams for each major development. Both companies would maintain their independent identities while creating a formal partnership entity for the Callaway portfolio. I believe we have a viable structure, I concluded as the meeting adjourned. Sophia will coordinate with legal to draft partnership agreements while we proceed with due diligence on the portfolio. As the others departed, Robert lingered again, waiting until we were alone before speaking. "This feels like a defining moment," he observed, "for both companies and for us personally." "How so?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "We're creating something neither of us could accomplish independently," he explained. "Not just temporarily aligning interests, but building a lasting framework for collaboration. It's the business equivalent of recommitting to our marriage after fundamentally reassessing its foundation." The analogy was surprisingly apt, capturing the personal dimension of our professional evolution. The difference being that this partnership is based on clear-eyed assessment of each other's actual capabilities, I noted, rather than comfortable assumptions or traditional expectations. "Exactly," Robert agreed. "And that makes it infinitely stronger. We're choosing this collaboration with complete awareness of both its challenges and potential." The observation contained an important insight about our journey. What had begun as a confrontation forcing Robert to recognize my capabilities had evolved into something more balanced. We were now making deliberate choices about our future. Together, both professionally and personally, with mutual understanding that had been absent in our earlier relationship. "I appreciate how you've approached this opportunity," I told him, acknowledging his growth. "There's been no territoriality, no attempt to assert control beyond what Mitchell's contribution warrants. Just practical collaboration toward shared objectives." "I've learned a few things these past months," Robert said with a small smile. "About partnership, about recognizing value regardless of its source, about the limitations of ego in business decisions. Expensive lessons," I observed, referring to the projects and opportunities he had initially lost through underestimating me. "Worth every penny," he replied without hesitation, "both professionally and personally." As we left the conference room together, heading toward our respective offices to begin implementing the acquisition strategy, I reflected on the unexpected path that had brought us to this point. What had started as my silent accumulation of success, building Horizon in the shadows while Robert remained oblivious, had transformed into an open, balanced partnership that enhanced both our business interests and personal connection. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activity as we pursued the Callaway acquisition. Due diligence teams examined each property in the portfolio, legal experts drafted partnership agreements, and financial analysts structured the complex capital requirements for the transaction. Throughout this process, Robert and I moved seamlessly between leadership roles, each contributing our particular expertise while respecting the other's domain. The Portland Heights environmental assessment identified potential remediation requirements. Robert reported during one of our daily briefings. "Nothing catastrophic, but we'll need to adjust the development timeline to accommodate soil testing and possible contamination treatment." "Impact on financial projections?" I asked, immediately focusing on investment implications. "Approximately $3.2 million in additional costs, 6-month delay for the affected parcels," Robert confirmed. "We've adjusted the phasing to minimize revenue impacts. The overall returns remain within acceptable parameters." This matter-of-fact exchange exemplified our new working relationship, focused on solutions rather than control, each contributing specific expertise without power struggles or unnecessary deference. The Portland Heights remediation challenge might once have become a point of tension, with Robert potentially concealing or minimizing the issue to protect his authority. Now it was simply a practical matter requiring joint problem-solving. "We should adjust the sustainability certifications plan accordingly," I suggested. The remediation process actually presents an opportunity to implement more advanced bioremediation approaches, which would enhance our environmental impact metrics. Robert nodded, immediately grasping the strategic implications. That could potentially convert a liability into a marketing advantage. The brownfield to greenfield narrative resonates strongly with both investors and community stakeholders. Our complementary thinking, my focus on sustainability metrics and investment implications, Robert's understanding of development positioning and community engagement, created solutions neither might have identified independently. 2 months into the acquisition process, with partnership agreements finalized and due diligence nearing completion, we received unexpected news that would test our newfound equilibrium. Meridian Group has submitted a competing offer for the Callaway portfolio, Sophia reported during our morning briefing. $330 million, all cash, with accelerated closing timeline. The figure represented a significant premium over our carefully structured offer of $320 million. Meridian, the same national developer that had competed with us for the warehouse district, clearly recognized the strategic value of the portfolio and was leveraging their substantial capital resources to secure it. Source? I asked, considering the implications. Direct communication from Callaway's acquisition team, Sophia confirmed. They're honoring our right to respond given our advanced negotiations, but the timeline is aggressive. We have 48 hours to counter or match. Robert and I exchanged glances, both recognizing the challenge this presented to our partnership. Matching Meridian's offer would require additional capital beyond our initially approved investment threshold. Our carefully balanced financial structure would need rapid recalibration, potentially altering the equilibrium between Horizon and Mitchell's respective contributions. Let's assess our options, I suggested, maintaining a measured tone despite the pressure. Sophia, model revised financial projections if we match Meridian's offer. James, evaluate whether accelerated closing is feasible given our current due diligence status. The teams dispersed to complete these analyses, leaving Robert and me to consider the strategic implications more privately. This complicates our carefully balanced partnership structure, he observed once we were alone. Mitchell is already at maximum capital deployment based on our current offer. Horizon has additional resources available, I acknowledged, but increasing our contribution would necessarily shift the ownership percentages and control provisions we've negotiated. The situation presented our first significant test since establishing our new dynamic, a challenge that would reveal whether our partnership could adapt to unexpected pressures without reverting to former patterns. We need to determine whether the portfolio justifies the increased investment, Robert said, approaching the problem analytically rather than territorially, and whether the adjusted partnership terms would remain viable for both organizations. His focus on mutual benefit, rather than Mitchell's specific position, reflected how profoundly our professional relationship had evolved. 6 months earlier, Robert might have resisted any change that diminished his company's relative control. Now, he was evaluating the opportunity based on its objective merits for both entities. Let's run comprehensive projections before discussing specific term adjustments, I suggested. The increased acquisition cost might be offset by other factors: timing advantages, reduced competition in key markets, synergies across properties. Robert nodded agreement. I'll have Mitchell's analysts collaborate with your team on revised financial models. We should have preliminary results by this afternoon. Throughout the day, our respective organizations worked intensively to evaluate the implications of matching Meridian's offer. Financial models were recalculated, ownership structures reassessed, development timelines reconsidered. By evening, we had a clear picture of both the challenges and opportunities the situation presented. The revised projections confirm portfolio viability even at the higher acquisition price, Sophia reported as we reconvened. Internal rate of return decreases by approximately 1–2%, still exceeding our baseline investment criteria. The accelerated closing is feasible, James added. We've completed sufficient due diligence on critical properties to proceed, with contingency provisions for remaining assessments. The fundamental question, I observed, is whether the modified partnership structure remains acceptable given the changed capital requirements. All eyes turned to Robert, who would need to determine whether Mitchell Properties could accept a diminished position in the overall partnership while maintaining meaningful involvement. I've been considering our options, he began thoughtfully. Mitchell cannot increase our capital contribution beyond current commitments, which would necessarily reduce our ownership percentage if Horizon provides the additional investment. He paused, and I waited for him to continue, curious how he would approach this challenge to our carefully negotiated balance. However, he continued, I believe we can maintain equilibrium through operational value contributions. Mitchell has existing relationships with key regulatory agencies and community stakeholders across the portfolio. We can leverage these connections to accelerate development timelines, potentially offsetting the increased acquisition cost through earlier revenue generation. The proposal was creative and practical, acknowledging the financial reality while identifying alternative ways Mitchell could contribute value proportionate to its partnership position. That approach has merit, I agreed, genuinely impressed by his solution-oriented thinking. We could structure performance incentives tied to development acceleration, allowing Mitchell to earn back effective ownership percentage through operational excellence. The concept immediately resonated with both teams, sparking productive discussion about specific metrics and incentive structures that could maintain partnership balance despite the shifted financial contributions. By midnight, we had developed a revised acquisition strategy. Horizon would provide the additional capital required to match Meridian's offer, with Mitchell receiving performance-based incentives that could restore their effective ownership position through successful project execution. The approach respected financial realities, while preserving the essential balance between our organizations. I believe this framework addresses the immediate challenge while maintaining our partnership principles, I concluded as we finalized the strategy. Sophia will prepare the revised offer for submission to Callaway tomorrow morning. As the meeting adjourned and team members departed, Robert and I remained in the conference room, both exhausted but satisfied with our solution. That was an impressive demonstration of partnership under pressure, I observed. 6 months ago, this situation might have devolved into territorial positioning or resentment over changed terms. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have recognized the value Mitchell could contribute beyond pure capital, Robert acknowledged, or been comfortable with creative approaches to partnership equilibrium. The observation highlighted how profoundly his perspective had evolved, from defining business value primarily through financial metrics to understanding the multiple dimensions of contribution a partnership could encompass. Your proposal for performance-based recalibration was genuinely innovative, I told him, offering sincere professional appreciation. It transformed what could have been a competitive tension point into a structure that potentially benefits both organizations. Robert smiled, clearly pleased by the recognition. I've learned a few things from watching you work, particularly your ability to identify value beyond traditional financial measures. The comment reflected healthy professional respect, Robert learning from my approach without defensiveness or competitive comparison. Should we submit the revised offer? I asked, returning to the immediate decision before us. Absolutely, Robert confirmed without hesitation. The portfolio aligns perfectly with our integrated development strategy, and the performance-based structure actually creates stronger incentives for operational excellence. It's good business for both companies. His confident assessment, based on objective analysis rather than ego or positional concerns, represented exactly the kind of partnership I had always hoped might be possible between us. The following morning, we submitted our revised offer to Callaway, matching Meridian's price while highlighting our superior development approach and community integration strategy. The performance-based partnership structure between Horizon and Mitchell formed a central element of our proposal, demonstrating how our complementary strengths created value beyond pure financial capacity. 3 tense days later, Callaway's acquisition team delivered their decision. Despite Meridian's significant resources and national presence, our integrated approach and established success with similar projects had earned Callaway's confidence. The portfolio would become the cornerstone of our expanded partnership, transforming both Horizon and Mitchell into dominant forces in sustainable development across the West Coast. "Congratulations," Robert said simply as we received the news together in my office. "This represents a transformative opportunity for both our organizations. And a testament to what we can accomplish through genuine collaboration," I added, acknowledging the personal dimension of our professional success. Robert nodded, his expression reflective. "When you first revealed Horizon's existence, I couldn't have imagined us reaching this point. Not just recovering from that disruption, but creating something stronger than either company could achieve independently." "The disruption was necessary," I observed. "Without that forced recalibration, we'd have continued in our established patterns indefinitely." "To my significant detriment," Robert acknowledged wryly, "both professionally and personally." His ability to recognize this reality without defensiveness demonstrated genuine growth. Robert seeing clearly how his former perspective had limited not just me, but his own potential as well. That evening, we celebrated the successful acquisition, with a private dinner at home rather than a public restaurant. The choice reflected how our relationship had evolved, no longer focused on external perceptions or status signals, but on the genuine connection we had rebuilt through months of honest engagement. "I've been thinking about something you said when you first revealed Horizon," Robert mentioned as we lingered over dessert. "About why you kept your success hidden for so long." "What about it?" I asked, curious about his reflection. "You said you'd been playing small, not just in your investments but in our marriage, to protect my ego and maintain my comfortable illusions." I nodded, remembering the confrontation that had sparked our transformation. That was true. I consistently minimized my accomplishments and capabilities to avoid threatening your sense of authority. "I've come to realize how profoundly unfair that was," Robert said earnestly. "Not just your feeling compelled to diminish yourself, but my creating an environment where that seemed necessary." The acknowledgement was meaningful, Robert taking responsibility not just for underestimating me, but for establishing conditions where hiding my success felt like the safest choice. "We both participated in that dynamic," I acknowledged. "I chose concealment over confrontation, building parallel success rather than demanding recognition." "But the question that keeps returning to me," Robert continued, "is whether you ever would have revealed Horizon if circumstances hadn't forced the issue. Would we have continued indefinitely in those patterns if the Seattle project hadn't created that moment of reckoning?" It was a profound question, one I had considered many times during our months of reconciliation. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. Each year of successful concealment made revelation more difficult, more potentially disruptive. The longer Horizon grew, the greater the gap between your perception and reality became, and the more dramatic any correction would necessarily be. Robert nodded, absorbing this. "So, in a way, the confrontation over Seattle was fortunate. Painful, but ultimately necessary for both of us." "For our marriage, certainly," I agreed. "Whether Horizon benefited from exposure is more complicated. There were advantages to operating without scrutiny or preconceived expectations. But limitations as well," Robert observed. "Your current position as a recognized industry leader creates opportunities that anonymous operation couldn't access." The observation was perceptive, acknowledging the complex trade-offs involved in my transition from hidden to visible success. "The greatest benefit has been authenticity," I said after considering his point. operating as my complete self, rather than compartmentalizing my capabilities between professional achievement and personal presentation. That authenticity has transformed both of us, Robert acknowledged, enabling me to finally see you clearly, but also forcing me to confront limitations in my own perspective that might otherwise have gone unchallenged. As our conversation continued into the evening, reflecting on our journey from confrontation to partnership, I recognized how profoundly our relationship had been reconstructed. What had begun as my silent accumulation of success, building horizon in the shadows of Robert's dismissive assumptions, had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated. A genuine partnership based on mutual respect and clear-eyed recognition of each other's actual capabilities. The woman who had once concealed her business genius behind garden club meetings and charity committees now operated openly as a recognized industry leader. The husband who had once mockingly dismissed his wife's financial interests now collaborated with her as a respected professional partner. We had discovered, through painful but necessary disruption, the possibility of a relationship where neither needed to diminish themselves to accommodate the other's limitations. As we prepared for bed that night, the successful Callaway acquisition, symbolizing our new professional equilibrium, Robert paused by the window overlooking the Portland skyline. "I see the city differently now," he observed quietly. "Each building, each development represents possibilities I wouldn't have recognized 6 months ago. It's as though my vision has expanded, not just professionally, but in every domain." "How so?" I asked, joining him at the window. "I spent years constructing a narrative about who I was, who you were, what success looked like," he explained. "Rigid boundaries that seemed essential to my identity. Breaking those boundaries has been humbling but unexpectedly liberating." The insight reflected genuine transformation, Robert recognizing how his former perspective had limited not just his understanding of me, but his own potential growth and fulfillment. The most significant boundaries are often the ones we create ourselves, I observed. The categories and limitations we accept without question. Robert nodded, his arm slipping around my waist as we stood together overlooking the city where both our companies were now reshaping the urban landscape. "Thank you," he said simply, "for forcing me to see beyond those boundaries, for refusing to remain confined by my limited perception, for building something extraordinary despite my failure to recognize its value." The acknowledgement was complete and unqualified, Robert taking full responsibility for his former blindness, while expressing genuine appreciation for my persistence in creating success regardless of his recognition. "And thank you," I replied, "for proving capable of growth beyond what I honestly expected, for choosing adaptation over defensiveness when confronted with uncomfortable truths, for becoming a partner I genuinely respect rather than merely tolerate." Our mutual recognition, neither minimizing past difficulties nor dwelling exclusively on them, created space for something new to continue emerging between us. Not a restoration of our former relationship, which had been built on incomplete understanding and artificial limitations, but the ongoing development of a partnership based on authentic knowledge and genuine appreciation. As Portland's lights sparkled below us, illuminating the neighborhoods and developments that would be transformed through our newly secured portfolio, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. What had begun as my silent investment, building financial power and professional success while outwardly conforming to Robert's limited expectations, had evolved into something far more valuable. A partnership where both our capabilities could flourish without constraint or concealment. The silent investor had found her voice, and remarkably, her husband had proven capable of not just hearing it, but valuing it as essential to their shared future. Together, we were building something neither could have created alone: a business. Partnership transforming Portland's development landscape, and a personal relationship founded on mutual respect rather than comfortable illusion. The coming months would bring new challenges as we implemented our ambitious plans for the Callaway portfolio. The business community would continue watching our partnership with curiosity and, in some cases, skepticism about its sustainability. Our respective organizations would need ongoing guidance to maintain productive collaboration without unhealthy competition or territorial disputes. Yet, facing these challenges together, with clear recognition of each other's strengths and limitations, with genuine commitment to mutual success rather than individual dominance, we had discovered a foundation far stronger than either of us had built before. Not perfect, not without occasional tension or disagreement, but authentic in a way our previous relationship had never achieved. As we turned from the window and prepared for sleep, I felt a quiet satisfaction distinct from the vindication I had initially sought when revealing Horizon's existence. What we had created in the months since that confrontation wasn't about proving Robert wrong or asserting my superior judgment, but about establishing a partnership where both our capabilities could be fully expressed and appreciated. The silent investor had emerged from the shadows, bringing light not just to her own achievements, but to possibilities neither had previously imagined. And in that light, we were building something truly worth the difficult journey that had brought us here. A partnership based not on illusion or accommodation, but on the solid foundation of genuine recognition. 1 year after the Callaway acquisition, Horizon Mitchell Partnership celebrated the grand opening of Riverview Commons, the first completed project in our transformative warehouse district development. Community members, business leaders, and city officials gathered to tour sustainable apartments, local retail spaces, and the community garden that had become the heart of this revitalized neighborhood. As Robert and I cut the ceremonial ribbon together, I caught meaningful glances exchanged among longtime industry colleagues. They'd witnessed our complete journey, from Robert dismissing my business acumen to our present status as equal partners, heading Portland's most innovative development collaborative. "I never get tired of proving skeptics wrong," Robert whispered as applause erupted around us. "The best revenge is extraordinary success," I replied with a smile. Later that evening, we hosted a small dinner at home for our executive teams. The atmosphere was relaxed and celebratory, reflecting the genuine camaraderie that had developed between our organizations. "A toast," James proposed, raising his glass. "To Anna and Robert, who showed us that the most sustainable development isn't just about buildings, but about relationships transformed through honest recognition." The sentiment perfectly captured our journey, not just professionally, but personally. After our guests departed, we lingered on the terrace overlooking the city where our partnership was reshaping neighborhoods and communities. The lights of downtown sparkled below, including several buildings that now housed Horizon Mitchell projects. "Have you ever regretted revealing yourself?" Robert asked suddenly. "Or considered how things might have unfolded if you'd continued operating in the shadows?" I considered his question carefully. There were moments of doubt during the initial confrontation. But what we've built since then, not just the developments but our relationship, has validated that difficult decision. "We lost months to my blindness and ego," Robert acknowledged. "Years, really. But gained something more authentic than what we had before," I reminded him. "Partnership based on genuine recognition rather than comfortable illusion." He nodded, taking my hand. The silent investor became the voice I needed most. Looking out over Portland, I felt profound contentment. The journey from underestimated wife to acknowledged business leader had been challenging and at times painful. But the partnership that emerged, both personal and professional, was more fulfilling than either the silent accumulation of success or the momentary satisfaction of vindication. "What's next for Horizon Mitchell?" Robert asked, his tone reflecting the genuine curiosity that now characterized our relationship. "Something extraordinary," I replied, squeezing his hand. "Something we'll build together, with clear eyes and equal voices." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.